I guess I just was thinking, and we had a little conversation about this yesterday, and I've just been thinking about it on the drive home this morning about the mindset that's erupting in so many people now who have this fuel of anger to want to
Mm.
go out and be kind of aggressively sharing that. And this, I just saw on the news, there's 30 more potential riots planned today.
Yeah, with Brighton being one of them potentially.
Mm,
Yeah, it's a funny one, isn't it? I've been on a big journey myself about feeling my feelings, which is something that for over 30 years I tried quite hard not to do, but didn't realize that's what I was doing. But one feeling that I have up until last year, I'd have said, oh, I just don't really feel anger. It's not something that is part of
mm,
my emotional vocabulary, which when you think about it is actually nonsense. And what that really meant is that all this anger I've been squashing down. And I was walking into town 2 days ago to meet a friend, and I was just checking in on a few of my friends who are, um, who are rightly scared and vulnerable around this. And one of these friends said, yeah, I'm it's making me very angry, a bit cautious. They're thinking of coming to Brighton. I just felt myself marching into town with such rage, just bubbling away under my skin. I was like, how dare they? Like, how dare
mm,
they feel that they can come
mm,
here to my friends, to my community, to have this impact on the people that I love and people that I don't know and people that are loved, and it was just very interesting to tune into that for me. Because like I say, it's not anger's not something where I've really allowed myself to feel before, but there's what I was interested in is listening to that anger, and I'd love to hear more about how it's made you feel, but yeah, there's something really interesting in that for me, and I've been reading The Language of Emotions and also listening to the Art of Zen and Saving the Planet, and then
mm,
literally what I was
mm,
listening to before our conversation was about anger, and so it's just quite interesting to
mm, mm,
the role that anger plays in these kind
mm,
of times and conversations.
mm. And it's interesting as well, there's something about the heat.
Mm.
I was sort of reflecting back on the riots in 2012. I think they were in London when it was that really crazy 4 day, well, it wasn't just London, but the really crazy 4 days of heat. And then the rain came
Yeah,
and everything kind of sort of stopped.
yeah.
And I was thinking actually the heat this week has been quite intense in the UK, and that sort of boiling point.
It's like Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah.
What does he say? It's something like the couple, it's something, and the couples are abroad. He literally says there's going to be fights because it's hot.
Yes, because it's hot. Yeah. And I guess where I've gone in my head this last week is and I know what I'm about to say a lot of people won't like, but is like just reflecting on the animal part of us that's
Mm,
doing something at the minute. And I've been really interested for a long time in our culture, in particular English culture,
mhm.
and the role that men have in our cultural narrative
Yeah.
and the evolution of the male. I'm going to just put that in inverted commas because it's not just men out on the streets right now, but where is that protector role, where is that kind of physical uh, energy role,
Mm.
because that we know the testosterone levels in some bodies are much higher and need an outlet. And where is that space of whole, looking after your pack, looking after your community, having your territory, which is, whether we like it or not, there is a DNA,
Mhm.
something deep within us that is inbuilt to live in that way.
Mm.
And I've been really interested in how so many cultures across the world have transition points that are very, very physical for teenagers to go into adulthood, that can allow them to use a lot of this latent energy, both women and men, into a force for good.
Yeah.
And we have as our transition point GCSEs.
and then a week in Malaga.
Week in Malaga, getting very drunk and maybe having a few brawls. And so what are those like moments where we're allowing the physicality of the body to actually find its place? And
Mm,
where is the space in our culture for being, I hate this word, proud, or kind of supporting a community? So I've been really interested in thinking like what are the shouting slogans that are coming out of people's mouths, because where are they coming from?
mhm.
Like there's this like othering and protection kind of going on that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense, but it has to make sense because it's coming from somewhere. So I
Yes.
think this, I've just been really interested in like what is an absence in our culture that comes out in this way. And the other thought before I shush that I've ranted to many people about before is our, and it's not just British people, but it is very latent here, our response to football, which
Yeah.
brings out very, very similar, highly excessively negatively aggressive behavior in a lot of people.
Mhm.
And having lived in many, many different countries, football is family. Football is for everybody. Football is a really joyful, very physical, very competitive space. We have started to evolve to the place where a lot of friends won't take their children to football matches anymore because of the language and the violence that comes
Yeah.
out. And again,
Yeah.
it's like, what have we not got in our kind of cultural story for that, all of that energy to go into, that then it comes out in this sort of, like you said, latent,
Mm.
it's been bottled for so long, it just pours out in these really aggressive ways.
Well, they're great questions, and one of the reasons I love them is because one of the books I've been reading,
Mhm.
as recommended by the wonderful Tina Farr, is Belonging by
Mm.
Owen Eastwood. And it's really interesting. He is a performance coach. He works with sports teams, and he is from has Maori heritage, but he talks a lot about his sort of very mixed heritage and which bits of it he's felt connected to over his life. But the reason that I think it's really relevant here is that he talks a lot about the stories of them and us. And
Mhm.
this, like you
Mhm.
said, this tribal kind of instinct within us to see the world through this them us lens. And it's
Mm.
really powerful. It helps us a lot. We've developed it as a way of staying safe, but it's obviously causing huge issues. It can get very out of hand because
Mm.
really the important thing is the us. It's the us that
Mhm.
keeps us safe.
Mhm.
It's the stories of us that have allowed us to develop to where we are. But an
Mhm.
us can't exist without a them.
Mhm.
So story here is really, really important. And that's what I've been thinking about in the face of this is, okay, so how have we got to this point where the us is, for these people that are out there, you know, being racist and Islamophobic and violent, they've got this idea of us that is very exclusive and divisive.
Mhm.
But then you have these stories that come out of, imams who are meeting people at their gates and saying, "Come talk. This is
Mhm.
who we are.
Mhm.
We have these similarities." And I think that work is just so powerful to actually, and it just makes me question and think, what is my role? How can I help to create, rather than coming in with my anger and going,
Mhm.
well, they're them and I'm with
Mhm.
us and they're the
Mhm.
bad ones and we're the good ones.
Mhm. Mhm.
Actually, how helpful is that versus how could we create a narrative of us together and us?
Mhm.
Because, as you say, English identity in particular, British, but I would say particularly English identity, we talked about earlier this week. There's some people feel that it's hard to know what that is, or,
Mhm. Mhm.
but actually when I think about the 2012 Olympics and that embracing of us and that embracing of
Mhm.
multiculturalism and that embracing of weaving together of different stories and that being the
Mhm.
us and the us
Mhm.
being about hospitality and welcome and all of that, yeah, there's something in there for me, but
Mhm.
I haven't I haven't landed on anything yet, so that
It
was a
makes me
bit of a
think of
ramble.
the larger us, Alex. I can't remember his surname. Sorry, Alex. It's an organization that really looks at this of like
Mm.
us beyond just our known communities, and actually also makes me think of John Alexander's work in citizenship, and really thinking about when we shift the narrative to become a citizen of our community,
Mhm.
suddenly we care about what's going on, and really just appreciating all of the cleanup that's been happening after so many of these riots, with
Yeah.
folks that recognize that the community is united in its care, not divided in its hate. But even that word belonging, and that narrative, the book that you're reading, I think it just speaks to this absence, perhaps for many, of a place to belong. And I
Mm.
think we were chatting about this the other day, as our culture here, and I'm going to just use English culture because I think it does need slightly separating from Scottish and Irish and Welsh. We have evolved to the point where our meeting places, where we would come together to belong, don't really exist anymore.
Yeah.
Whether that was church, whether that was community hall, whether that was a youth centre, whether that was the village square, whether that was the community, what were they called, the not the pastures, the commons,
Mm.
like the common grounds. As time has evolved, all the places where we used to gather, markets and rituals, and festivals, all
Yeah.
the gathering spaces where we belonged together have slowly disappeared.
Mhm.
And so there was also something in my thought, and I do not for a second kind of appreciate or allow any of the violence that's gone on, but I'm trying to understand what people are finding when they merge on the streets with this testosteronic kind of, that's not a word, it's a good word,
I
testosteronic
like it though.
force.
Yeah.
Is a sense of belonging to something bigger than themselves, and
Yeah.
that's when you get that swarm and that
Yes.
pack. um, so I've
Mm.
also been really interested in how we can bring places back into our communities where we can belong together, because that is something that's been eroded. Even in the
Yeah.
house, kitchens and dining rooms have been removed from modern houses, and staff
Mhm.
rooms are being removed from schools. But those are the connection spaces where we belong together. And in a way, it's not surprising that
Mhm.
we then have this eruption of them and us, because we're not having spaces to just be us together.
I think that's so wise, and I think it's not. You've touched on it. It's not just about spaces. It's also about rituals and times, moments
Yes.
come together.
Yeah.
Because if
Mm.
you aren't engaged in religious ritual, we've lost so much of that kind of and even if people are religious, actually that's becoming less common in this country, and I think yeah, we don't have these moments of celebration, of joy, of
Mm-hmm.
collective.
Mm-hmm.
It's come up a few times over the last few months, with a sense of collective effervescence and the power of
Yes.
that. And there are moments where people are getting that. My
Mm-hmm.
wonderful former colleague Sandy wrote a great blog for Reboot the Future around the collective effervescence at Taylor Swift concerts. You know, the power of coming together, and we're having, some groups, some tribes are having these moments, and then others, and we're not having them enough as a society, as a community. How do
Mm-hmm.
we, what yeah, what rituals do we have we lost, and what could help to bring us together?
Mm-hmm.
One thing I was thinking about, slight tangent here, but you mentioned the football. I was thinking about, the Euros happened not that long ago,
Mm-hmm.
and we have some sort of rituals in place and gathering spaces in place for coming together to celebrate and watch the football happen. But
Mm-hmm.
as soon as we lose, we
Mm-hmm.
dissipate, and we
Mm-hmm.
go off alone and
Mm-hmm.
grieve alone. And I was just sort of talking to my partner Andy, and I was saying, well, what if there was something that we all did together? It was almost like at New Year when we all sing Old Lang Syne and we all
Mm-hmm.
shake arms and we just process together. you know,
Yeah.
if only there
Yeah.
were these moments where we could win or lose, or in different situations come together as communities,
Mm.
and have ways to process our emotions together. And again, that sounds probably a bit weird and a bit hippie, but
I don't think it's weird and hippie. It's what we're built to do. And again, it's like you've just touched so powerfully on all of the elements that Indigenous cultures still hold,
mm,
and that culturally we all used to do. We've just evolved, or we've just forgotten, or we've just lost, which is coming together, to dance, to sing, to sit in circle, to have something bigger than us that's joining us.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's all of that, even like Old Lang Syne at New Year, we're singing together whilst holding hands with strangers in a moment of celebration.
Yeah.
And I remember when I lived in London, I used to absolutely love about 7 hours of life in London, between about 11 p.m. and 4, 5 a.m. because everybody was friendly to everybody else.
Yeah.
You just run up and hug someone on the street, Happy New Year. Whereas then the next day, New Year's Day, it was back to like nobody had any eye contact,
Yeah.
and I was like, nothing has changed. We could keep doing this. But I really love what you just said there about how can we bring these spaces back where it's ritual that
Mm-hmm.
is, and again, yeah, every Indigenous culture around the world has singing and dancing and circles as part of a daily custom. So you've got that space to harmonize together. You've got a space for your physicality to be releasing all of that trapped emotion,
Yeah.
and you've just got connection spaces where you're sitting in circle. And we also, it wasn't super long ago where we used to have ritual points over the year, and festivals. And I guess festivals is another conversation. But even when I was at school, we did maypole dancing, we did
Mm-hmm.
country dancing, and we celebrated Lammas, and we celebrated every single kind of half and full moon kind of point across the year,
Interesting.
in with a ritual, with a dance, with food. And I'm not that old; it wasn't crazy long time ago. um, and what have we got left now? We've got Halloween, which has been so consumerized
Yeah.
that it's nothing to do with the land and the moon and the shift in energy. It's to do with candy and,
Yeah.
trick or treating and how many
Yeah.
sweets can you get in your bag.
It's
Um,
almost like, I think in some ways the most connected we get to the seasons is when the clocks go back or forward. And you suddenly, and everyone goes, oh, is it spring forward, fall back? And you have to
mhm,
remember.
mhm,
And I think about, yeah, there's no real, and you have Christmas, but that again, totally consumerized. There's not really these moments of just checking in with the rhythm and the flow of the seasons.
mhm,
And we were even talking about this yesterday. Actually, a lot of our societal structures are set up in almost in opposition of the seasons. We were saying that
mhm,
the end of term starts to happen in April, which is springtime. So
mhm,
we're coming to a close when things are starting to come alive. We
mhm.
start celebrating a new school year in September, just as things are starting to slow down, and it's all out of whack, out of rhythm.
Yeah, and I think I don't want to sort of trivialize what's happening, but I think it's a symptom of us being terrifically out of balance again, and both being out of balance in what is how we're living, and how we're sort of responding to what are deeply emotional physical needs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we were talking about this yesterday, the kind of cultural loss that exists, in particular, I think in English culture. I've had so many conversations with so many people over the years who felt both ashamed to be
Mm-hmm.
English
Yeah.
and have felt both a total void in what does it even mean to be English.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you start to expose yourself to so many of the diverse cultures around the world, you suddenly think, oh, we don't have particular rituals, we don't have particular foods, we don't, well, scones and fish and chips, I don't know,
That's
pork
the thing.
pie.
Everyone sees our national dish as fish and chips. It's like, how often do people eat fish and chips?
Yes, and what does it even mean?
Yes.
We don't have music that speaks to the land of England.
We've got
We don't
Jerusalem, which is about
have, which is
different
pillage
country.
and
But yeah.
colonialism. um, and so actually what we've done is, over the years of us, we talked about this kind of briefly the other day, over the years of us leaving our land to go and conquer others,
Mm,
we've actually lost the tethering to where we come from and who we are.
yeah.
And when so many cultural narratives are rooted to land and rooted to place and rooted to ritual and rooted to rhythm, we don't have that.
Hmm.
And so there's this sort of maelstrom of lost souls, and also we don't have that deeply spiritual practice of being tethered to something bigger than ourselves. We've just got these vacuums. And so I say this like with utter heartbreak, because I spent a lot of my life struggling with this of like,
Yeah.
where do I belong and what do I belong to and what is the story of my culture?
Yeah.
um and yeah, I don't know.
No, I mean, I totally agree. And I was listening to a podcast yesterday with Trisha Hersey, who is incredible. She has the NAP ministry, and she talks a lot about the power of rest. And she was talking about Wendell Berry, the American author, and
Mm,
he has a book, and I can't remember, or an essay, I can't remember what it's called now, but about exactly that, that the one of the devastating things about colonialism is that yes, it was devastating for everyone because it devastated the countries, the lands, the people that were colonized, and the colonizers lost too, because the
mhm,
colonizers lost their sense of identity, and not just that, but they lost their sense of connection and
mhm,
balance in the
mhm,
world, and that sense of usness. I haven't read the book myself, so I'm talking about a bit too third hand to really dive into it, but I think there's just something really important to acknowledge there, that and I'm not saying, oh, it's just as bad, because it's obviously what the England, what the UK did in other countries is horrific and has been so damaging. But just to also notice that there is damage here too, and that is
mhm,
also
mhm,
heartbreaking. It's
mhm,
the
mhm,
people here are damaged by that.
mhm.
It's a total lose lose.
And it's that soul damage, isn't it, as well,
Mm.
of like the vacuum of lostness. There's so many narratives as well of pain, I think, in all of these kind of patterns of behavior over the years. And it's interesting. One of the curriculum that we're going to release for free, having had this conversation, is our global cultures curriculum, which really starts to explore what is culture, and it's a sense of belonging to land. And that's kind of the origin of having so many diverse cultures around the world. Why have we got so many diverse cultures? Well, because we all belong to different parts of land, and that land has different heat, it has different weather, it has different climate, it has different terrains, it has different foods, it has different rhythms because of where it is in the equator. And that has birthed all the diversity of our culture. um, and coming back to this idea of rootlessness, one of the reasons that I personally have found such a sense of belonging only very recently, since I moved to Totnes and to Dartmoor, is to find my belonging to land. Because
Mm.
suddenly there's a tethering to a place that is in England, and I've fallen in love with England,
Mm.
not quite being English.
No.
I've had to probably put that aside and probably will never pick that up, but I've fallen in love with the land, and there's that sense of kind of reconnection and rebelonging. But then if we come back to so many of the riots that are happening right now, and they are predominantly in cities. I'm not going to say that they're not happening in smaller towns, because they are, but they're predominantly in cities where there isn't perhaps that sense of a connection, as we've said already, socially to, somewhere, a belonging place, but
Mm.
also to land, because the
Yeah.
land has been tarmacked. And so yeah, so it doesn't make anything any easier, but that there is just these symptoms of lack, I think, that
Mm.
are coming up, in this kind of eruption that.
Yes,
Mm,
exactly. And I can feel myself getting frustrated even with, as I'm loving this conversation, but I'm also feeling myself frantically wanting a solution and to say, well,
mhm,
okay,
mhm,
so what? So what
mhm.
these rioters are feeling this lack and this loss and this and a lacking identity, like that doesn't excuse things. And I don't think, and that's not what we're saying. We're not saying it excuses things.
Not at all,
Not in
no.
any way. It's
Mm,
inexcusable. But there's something around trying to meet to not to meet but to understand. And again, it's kind of bringing me back to the chapter I was listening to just now about the art of Zen and saving the planet, about loving people despite what they're doing. And in particular, the chapter was talking about the Cook brothers and their work in the fossil fuel industry and to lobby against fossil fuel regulation.
mm,
And the speaker was talking about the fact that you have to be vulnerable alongside people, and it's not about having power over. And she doesn't even talk about power with, like Joanna Macy, but she talks about power for, and actually thinking about the collective whole. You know, actually, what do we need as a collective whole? How can we have power for each other? You know, and thinking about what are what's everyone bringing? What are these perspectives? You know, there is something in all of this that can lead towards the better future, that can create this healthier, better future. So what do we need to learn? What can we meet and bring out of out of this sort of trauma to bring us forward into a world that's better for everyone? And as we've said, is it actually when we see the lack of belonging and the loss of sense of cultural identity, actually this is where we can maybe work and start to fix and to mend, and to not say, oh well, never mind, that's they're doing bad things because bad things have happened to them. It's not that. It's saying we see where we can meet, what we can bring.
And it's like they're saying, well, we see the patterns of trauma playing out, but they cannot continue to play out because they
Mm.
are just destructive. So let's forge alternative healing kind of pathways. It's making me want to kind of dance probably for the next conversation in the space of collective awe, because I just had this thought when you were talking about collective effervescence earlier in Sandy's work, in that notion of the recent eclipse,
Mm.
and how so many people suddenly were sharing conversations and spaces and a collective experience of being in awe, of
Yeah.
being suddenly a tiny little person floating around of a tiny little planet in the kind of vastness of the universe.
Yeah.
And that collective experience of something much larger than us unites us in that way. And normally we're united in conflict, or we're united in some horrific kind of natural disaster or warfare. Or, you know, we're rarely connected in moments of utter, you know, effervescence and awe. But the power of awe is extraordinary because it takes us away from ourselves into something much bigger. And I think there's something in that that could be really interesting as well, of kind of starting to tap into. And then also, just as you said there, this is not a case of like, we understand why this is happening, you know, shucks, there's nothing we can do. It's like, we can understand, but what can we do to bring these gathering spaces back and find places to welcome the larger us? And
Mm.
that's both the larger us kind of unifying communities, but the larger us in terms of our moral courage,
Mm.
um, and bring out the fullness of all of our potential, rather than the lack part, which then gets fed by the anger and the you know, the violence and whatever that is. Like, where is that larger us that we can tap into? um
Exactly that. Exactly that. And I think about our role in this. You know, we are two white women who have that affords us a privileged position to act from. You know, this shouldn't have to be the work of those communities who are being targeted and assaulted and abused. This is, you know, this is something that those of us who have that privilege of safety have the power to do something about. And you know, I just think, again, like I said, these conversations that I have with friends, they're, you know, everyone is coming at it from different perspectives, but you know, we shouldn't be expecting anything from anyone right now who is feeling exhausted and targeted and vulnerable and scared. Instead, I'm feeling myself that this is where I have a role to play. You know, it would be very easy to stay silent, or to, you know, just go, oh, this makes me sad, or this makes me feel shocked. But actually, it's not, shouldn't be shocking, in the sense that this has been going on, bubbling away for a long time. To say that we're shocked and to say that we're sad isn't enough. You know, we have, I don't know, there's something in me that just knows that this is, we have to be doing more than that. And I think that's where I, you know, come back to this whole, what is it? And then that's why it gets helpful to think about, okay, well, it's about community, it's about larger us, it's about, well, that is something that I can do. I can
And it's
listen.
something that we're actively doing, both in
Yes.
terms of our work and in our own
Yeah.
capacities. But it's also that narrative of active hope, of like, let's look at what is really happening and let's go beyond that to where we would like to be doing and start to kind of create those spaces.
Mm.
And I guess just a bit of activism that that we've practiced together and also have been practicing for the last year or so, which is so small and so powerful, is hosting these little Jefferson dinners.
Mm.
So Thomas Jefferson, when he was in office in the US, he used to invite up to 8 people for dinner from very, very diverse backgrounds. And that was the point, really diverse political, socioeconomic, cultural backgrounds, to share a meal and one conversation. And the invitation is that there is just one voice heard at any time. And having done now 6 of these with random folk in my local town, Totnes, who don't know each other, they know me vaguely and sometimes I don't know them, but we just share a meal in someone's home. You soften the minute you come in because you're in someone's home. You soften even more because you're sharing one pot around one table. You soften even more because only one voice is heard. And suddenly there's humanity that's allowed to be listened to. And I think, you know, it might feel like that's not activism, Rachel, that's a dinner party. It really isn't. It's something much more transformational. And I know there's so many different folks working in different ways, whether it's community cafes or whether it's climate conversations or gathering spaces where folks are just coming together in different ways through diversity to just have something that connects them that isn't we are connecting to be different together. It's something bigger. So I don't know, it might be interesting to sort of think about, can we be doing some of these more actively, both as an organization as well as individually.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that's so true. I think that kind of gathering and space is really important. I also think about, the core of our work is in education, and actually how
yeah.
do we
Mm-hmm.
raise a generation of young people who are able to celebrate culture and differences
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
uniqueness, who are able to find spaces to gather and to connect and to celebrate, and I think that is also really crucial, is how we can empower teachers to create these spaces, these cultures in schools where
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
this isn't, this behavior just wouldn't it wouldn't land, because you've
Mm-hmm.
got young people who are just who celebrate being together and diversity.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
think that sometimes, again, yeah, if I'm finding myself feeling at a loss for what can happen, what we can do in the world, I think there's individual things we can do, there's things we can do in our communities, and there's things that we can do on those wider systemic levels that we're doing,
Mm-hmm.
and particularly around
Mm-hmm.
education, and particularly around, you know, the way that these big parts of our society are structured.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that gives me hope, I guess.
Yeah, and it's just, for every story of lack and violence, I could tell you 100,000 stories of hope and courage and love and compassion. I think, again, we've got to remind ourselves that this is not who we are. This is a symptom of some of what we lack. But if we just feed ourselves just the lack stories, we can soon lose hope of all the goodness. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's also important, to kind of feed both being very aware of some of the kind of trauma that's happening, but also holding the kind of value and the kind of courage and the morality of the people, many, many, many people out there who are kind of creating these different stories.
Mm-hmm.
Um,